Congress was not interested in checking the administration since it was its administration, and the courts, it takes a long time for cases to go through the courts, and the courts have historically not been particularly good about checking. And you saw, civil society group after civil society group issuing reports and books like this, and filing lawsuits and filing petitions and organizing grassroots drives. And I think it's really quite remarkable, and particularly if you look at it historically. If you think back to the last major national security crisis in this country, the Cold War, and you ask, well, what was civil society doing then? And you look at the ACLU as sort of, the leading, a defender of liberty. What was it doing? It was purging itself of communists. It wasn't defending the communists, and there were, a couple of groups, a handful of groups that would defend the communists and got red-baited for doing so. And you compare that to today, in the wake of 9/11, where the ACLU has done a tremendous job, but it's, not alone. You have the civil rights groups, Center for Constitutional Rights, and the like. You have privacy groups, Center for Democracy and Technology. You have grassroots groups like the Bill of Rights Defense Committee, which organized resolutions around the country condemning the Patriot Act. You have librarians associations, you have immigrant groups, you have human rights groups. Most of these groups didn't exist during the Cold War. And then that sort of, I think provided information which then armed the world community, whose criticism, I think, played a very important role. It armed the press, which I think, particularly the print press, has been quite good, again, judging by historical standards. And I think it ultimately gave backbone to the courts. I don't think the Supreme Court would have even taken the Guantanamo case had it not been for the strong civil society, domestic and international organizing around that. So that's what. So I think we should give ourselves a pat on the back in terms of the role that civil society, like the World Affairs Council and the Century Foundation and all the the ACLUs, all the groups that have played a role in standing up for the principles that this country at its best stands for.
I was going to just essentially agree with that, but I have a slightly little micro meter of difference from David on that issue. I think that a lot of credit has to be given to the progressive community, and people like David and Ann have labored very, very hard to keep pushing this issue forward. So a lot of things were done right or done as well as could be expected. And 5 years or 4 years is not bad for the time that it takes for society to recover from reeling under the shock of something like 9/11 and to regain its bearings. So to that extent, I think our side did pretty well, and there probably was no one thing that we could have done that would have been made it any better. The only qualification I would add to that is I think that in very broad terms, people who are disturbed by what the Bush administration has been doing were not as savvy as we could have been in trying to deal with the weight of media pressure against our position and the steady drumbeat of viewpoints that dissent was disloyal and treacherous. And I say that not because I don't think there's any one thing that could have been done. It's not that somebody could have stood up and made a difference. David, for example, worked very hard and published a number of excellent op-eds on these kinds of subjects. But the other side was incredibly sophisticated and well organized and coordinated in the way that they kept pressure going to support whatever the administration was doing. That's the area, and as a result, even though we've won some victories in the courts, O'Connor has now been replaced by Alito, which is going to have staggering consequences. I think we just saw an absurd example yesterday in that employment discrimination case. Absurd result. And that portends, I think, very bad news for some of the things we care about. And if you look at Congress, in spite of the victories in the courts, very few, if any of them, have had any real traction in terms of turning around the ship of state. And we've gotten very little from Congress. And the fault doesn't lie with the progressive community, and it doesn't, in some ways, it doesn't lie with the Democrats in Congress, because they are inevitably going to reflect public pressure. So what I would see the agenda for the long term requires us to be very much more savvy about how to keep, to get some of our message into the broader media.
Okay, I think this should be the last question. We've gone over time. Yes, sir.
You spoke earlier about using a sledgehammer to eradicate problems. And I think one of the issues is when you use a sledgehammer on mercury, it just dissipates. So using a sledgehammer on terrorism by these kinds of tools is not just unproductive, it's counterproductive. Spoke earlier about Eisenhower. Do we have a situation where this kind of assault on liberty has taken place since the end of World War II in a subtle, under-the-table fashion? But we have occasional clown shows like the Bush administration that kind of provide us comic relief and targets buffoons as targets to make us feel like we're fighting for civil liberties and being effective.